Now, looking at the settings of these worlds, it's kind of interesting. These are some photographs that I just downloaded. And it's interesting, this is a special type of photography called high dynamic range lighting. And it gives these photographs a very toy-like look. It's very interesting and compelling in an interesting way. They almost look like oil paintings. There's another technique that was actually pioneered by a Japanese artist, Naoki Honjo. And these again are photographs. And there's a very interesting kind of form of photo processing where he's kind of collapsing the depth of field, oversaturating the colors, and a lot of other things. But basically he can take a photograph of any landscape and make it look like a little model, you know, like kind of toy train set thing. And these are really compelling to me. And I was trying to figure out why I found these so, you know, kind of interesting and compelling. And I think because it feels like a toy, it feels like I should have some control over it. I could reach down and pick these things up and maneuver them and actually kind of control and create these universes. And I think in some sense the worlds that we try to build want to feel that way. That's a big property of the environments that we want to create. Lego is a great brand, and it really kind of shows this property very well, that almost anything you can imagine you can kind of instantiate in Lego to some degree. These are very, you know, abstract models of reality. We are taking systems, buildings, whatever, that compose millions of parts, and now building them out of maybe 50 parts. But yet we can still recognize what they are. There's also a huge element kind of pride and creativity, you know, whereas there's really no limit to how many crazy things you can do with a set of Legos, you know. And that's kind of inviting the players, the people that are using these things to come in and basically show things that they can do with them that nobody else has done. And it's also a style in some sense. So we can take not just the real world, but fictional worlds, implement them in that style, and it has a very interesting kind of playful quality where you want to go in and kind of touch it, play with it, control it. Star Wars Legos was a great game. It was just amazing because not only did they pick up the style of Legos, but also the verbs. So when a character was attacked with a lightsaber, for instance, you know, they would actually break apart little Lego parts on the ground. And so they were, you know, combining the verbs of Star Wars with the verbs of Lego, as well as the nouns of Star Wars, the characters and whatnot, with the nouns of Legos. Playmobil is another set that's kind of interesting. This is a little bit more specific type of play set. But again, these are very abstract little models of reality. And it's interesting how they tackle all these different subjects, you know, so little kids can kind of have exposure to things that otherwise might feel kind of scary. And what's kind of interesting about Playmobil is the range of weird stuff they have. So they have like these surgeon sets, you know, for like, you know, if you're scared of Western medicine, you play with this, and oh, it's not that bad. You know, they have the toxic waste cleanup set. You know, so send your little kid off, go play with your toxic waste, little Billy, you know. I'm going to talk about a couple of other kind of worlds that are more on the story side. James Bond is one of the all-time most successful kind of story worlds. Originally came out of books. There were 14 books written by Ian Fleming. There were actually 24 movies made up to this point, representing about $4.5 billion in global revenue. So there are actually about 10 more movies now than there were books. They ran out of books a long time ago. James Bond, you know, occurs across the real world for the most part, with a few subtle differences, but in very exotic settings. In some sense, it feels like you're traveling the world and experiencing all these places that you might never go. James Bond villains have these amazing sets. This has become kind of like one of the things about James Bond is that the villains have these amazing kind of underground complexes, and you expect that at the end of every movie. It's interesting how some of these worlds can actually blend over in reality and change our perception. When they were actually hunting for Osama bin Laden around the Tora Bora area, somebody, I think the New York Times, started, you know, writing about how he had this huge underground complex with hydroelectric power and ventilation systems and operating rooms and all this. And pretty soon everybody believed it. Just because they'd seen so many James Bond movies. Of course he's a super villain, he has to have this evil lair. You know. I mean, even Donald Rumsfeld was basically confirming this in interviews. Of course, you know, once they really dug into Tora Bora, what they found were a few little rat holes with a couple of AK-47s in the back of the cave, you know. But still. The archetypes in James Bond are very strong. You have kind of the typical good guys, you know, his boss, his assistant, the guy who gives him all the cool toys. Really, the bad guys are the interesting part of James Bond. You have, of course, the, you know, the evil villain with these strange henchmen, and of course, always the fluffy white cat. Now, when you have strong archetypes like this in a story world, that makes it very easy to parody. So all you have to do is go in and replace every slot here, and you have basically a parody of James Bond. It kind of invites it, actually. Now, what's interesting about the archetypes on the women's side, they're always the beautiful women in James Bond, but they're the only archetypes in the story that are allowed to change sides. And so occasionally, during the James Bond movies, usually after James Bond sleeps with them, some of them will actually become good. And that's just kind of an established part of the James Bond formula, the archetypes. Of course, he has cool toys, and these are part of the verbs and abilities that James Bond has that kind of transcend our real world. Okay. Okay, this is time for the Russian Space Minute. Okay, so today, this will be the story of Soyuz 18A, which launched in April 1975. Now notice the A, which means that it never achieved orbit, because they had to launch another Soyuz 18 after this one. This is commanded by Vasily Lazarev and Olga Makarov. They were to go to the Salyut 4 space station and spend 3 months on board. That was their mission. On the way to launch pad, like every cosmonaut, they stopped halfway to launch pad, got out of the truck, and peed on the front tire. Because Yuri Gagarin did that on his first flight into space, and since he made it, obviously that's the reason why he made it into space safely. So ever since then, every cosmonaut since has stopped halfway to launch pad, gotten out and peed on the front tire, including the women cosmonauts. So at any rate, their flight launched. Now what happened next, the first stage separated fine. The second stage didn't separate from the third stage. The bolts didn't sever the way they were supposed to. Then the third stage ignited, and it took a while before it actually burned away the second stage. And so this area was stuck for quite a while. The rocket went way off trajectory during this, of course. Now they did have an escape rocket, like the Apollo astronauts did. A little rocket on top that was supposed to pull the capsule away in case of an emergency like this. The way the escape rocket was supposed to work was that on the launch pad, if the booster was starting to blow up, they could fire this little escape rocket. It would pull it way up, and they would land about 10 miles away from the launch pad to safety. In this case, the rocket was actually way downrange when the second stage didn't separate. By the time they actually got it separated, this escape rocket fired, it was pointed straight down to the Earth. Somehow, and it was a miracle, that the parachute still managed to work and stop, despite the fact that it was like overloaded by about 2 times its design limits. They did experience 21 Gs during this deceleration, though, which is way more than they trained for. Lazarev sustained internal injuries and was never able to fly again. Now, of course, at this point, they were way off course. They came down a very rugged, mountainous area. What happened is they hit a very steep slope, were rolling right toward a precipice, and right before they went off the cliff, the parachute snagged some trees and stopped the capsule. Now, it turned out also, to their dismay, that they landed inside of China. 50 miles across the border, about 1 mile from the Mongolian border. And Russia and China weren't really good friends at that point. So first thing Lazarev did was get out of the capsule in the snow and start burning all the secret papers he had. They then spent the rest of the night fending off wolves and trying to stay warm, which is to this day why the Russians still bring guns and vodka on every space mission. This is a true fact. But the next day, the Soviet Special Forces came across the border with helicopters, rescued the cosmonauts, managed to pick up the capsule, retrieve it, and get back across the border before the Chinese even discovered what happened. And at the end of the day, then the Russian Aerospace Ministry declined their 3,000 ruble space pay because they never made it into space. But they eventually appealed it all the way to Brezhnev, and he did pay them. So that's the end of the Russian Space Minute, which is probably longer than a minute. So, James Bond has had 24 movies made. Now, can anybody tell me who's had more? Okay, well, I was about 4 years old, okay, sitting on the couch watching TV. My mother was off vacuuming somewhere, okay? And I was just minding my own business, watching some cartoons. That's me. When this guy appears on the screen. And he was on the screen for quite a while, and I got very scared. This is actually one of my earliest childhood memories, perhaps my earliest. I don't know how long I was behind that couch, but it was a long time. I kept peeking out from behind the couch, and I was trying to calculate, could I make it to the door because I was so close to him, and I didn't want to risk it. And so I was trapped behind this couch for probably the whole Godzilla movie.